The book of Acts says, "He raised up David to be their king, of whom he testified and said, I have found in David, the son of Jesse, a man after my heart, who will do all my will." The life of David is one of the most triumphant and tragic stories in all of Scripture. God used him mightily, but he also failed miserably. God restored him, but consequences remained. In today's culture, sadly, there are many stories like his. Good leaders must think carefully about their character and their relationship with the Lord. David's story includes the following themes which will help us do so. First, leadership must be developed. Second, leaders need humility. Third, leaders face temptation. And finally, leaders must seek God. Even people we think of as natural-born leaders were not born that way. King David was no exception. David's example reminds us that we don't get to face our Goliath right away. When David volunteered to fight Goliath in 1 Samuel 17, Saul said, "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth." But David knew that God was preparing him for a moment like this. Tending sheep is a relatively lowly chore, but he faced many challenges which helped him grow. David responds to Saul by saying, "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father. And when there came a lion or a bear, and he took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he rose against me, I caught him by his beard, struck him, and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." To sum it all up, the little things matter. Dirty chores prepared David to kill a giant and save his people. Approach little things with excellence, and you will grow as a leader. That said, willingness to grow takes humility. In fact, all leaders need humility. Humility helps us recognize that God's timing is better than our timing. God can use periods of your life when you feel stuck or overqualified to prepare you for something greater. As a young boy, David was anointed king of Israel, but he waited many years to be king. Being humble also means giving space for God to help us in moments of need as a leader. David modeled this when fighting Goliath. The young boy said, "You come to me with a sword and a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head, so that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." Much later in David's life, he was reminded again of God's timing and the need to remain humble. David accepted that God would deal with Saul in his own time, even though Saul was trying to kill him. In 1 Samuel 24, David told Saul, "Behold, this day your eyes have seen how the Lord gave you today into my hand in the cave. And some told me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not put out my hand against the Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed." One commentator points out, quote, "Having now proved his innocence beyond doubt, David points out to Saul that in seeking to kill him, Saul is the one who is in the wrong. May the Lord judge between me and you, says David, because for his part, he will do nothing to avenge himself," end quote. Like David, we must embrace humility and accept God's timing and acknowledge that he is in control. Without humility, leaders assume they are in control and cannot fail. We must remember leaders face temptation and will fail if they are not careful. Studying the story of David through a lens of leadership also provides an opportunity to study failure, its real consequences, and how to respond. 2 Samuel 11 outlines how David takes Bathsheba, a married woman, for himself and conducts a terrible deed of selfish sexual immorality. Then, in an attempt to cover up the pregnancy, he has her husband Uriah killed. We can juxtapose David's acts with Uriah's response to being summoned by the king in the midst of battle. We are told that Uriah slept at the door of the king's house and did not go down to his house, choosing instead to remain with all the servants of his Lord. One commentator pointed out that, quote, Uriah knew where his duty lay. He was not on leave. David had expected and hoped that Uriah would prove to be like himself. Instead, he proved to be a man of integrity, whose first loyalty was to the king's interest rather than to his own pleasure, end quote. King David, a man who was favored by the Lord, plunged to the depths of sin and displeased the Lord. What can we learn from this? First, our actions have real consequences. Often, these consequences extend to those around us, even if they weren't directly involved in the original failure. Scripture shows us how these consequences occur during the lifetime of David. They bring tragedy and loss to mark the later years of his reign, as well as to those around him. 2 Samuel chapters 12 through 15 describe short-term consequences. In David's case, the child that was conceived between him and Bathsheba died. His sons raped and murdered others. They tried to kill him. There was a legacy of sexual immorality and evil in his children. Second, David's inability to control his desires also had a generational impact. The wisest king who ever lived, Solomon, wandered after foreign wives and idols in 1 Kings 11. Solomon's actions were also a consequence of David's mistakes. Ultimately, David is saved because he desires God more than anything else. The last lesson we will discuss is that leaders must seek God. Psalm 143 illustrates the heart that thirsts for the Lord. David's heart does three critical things well. First, David meditates on God's faithfulness. Verse 5 reads, I remember the days of old. I meditate on all that you have done. I ponder the work of your hands. Second, David repents and asks the Lord's direction. He begs God to give ear to my pleas for mercy and make me know the way I should go. Finally, David earnestly pursues the Lord and his glory. He asks God to save him for your name's sake, O Lord. Despite his many mistakes, David was a great leader because he loved God. In closing, it is important to remember that leadership takes practice and self-awareness. Just as athletes focus on strengthening their physical core in order to be competitive in their craft, leaders must do the same for their moral and spiritual self. Good leadership flows from the inside out. The Gospel of Luke says that the good person out of the good treasure of their heart produces good, and the evil person out of evil treasure produces evil, for it is out of the abundance of the heart that the mouth speaks. Let this verse from Proverbs be our final encouragement to you. Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life.